They were the biggest band the world had ever seen. But in 1966, at the height of Beatlemania, the Beatles did the unthinkable. They stopped touring. Exhausted from years on the road, from the deafening screams, and from being unable to hear their own instruments over the chaos of their crowds, John, Paul, George, and Ringo made a collective decision: no more live shows. Instead, they would retreat into the studio, a sacred space where their creativity could flourish, free from the pressures of performance. That decision changed music forever. What followed was a wave of genre-defining, studio-crafted masterpieces. 1967's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and the White Album the following year. It was a new chapter, not of loud applause, but of sonic innovation. Their final scheduled concert took place on August 29, 1966, at San Francisco's Candlestick Park, a historic farewell to the stage. Apart from one now iconic surprise rooftop performance atop Apple Corps headquarters on January 30, 1969, the Beatles would never again play a full live set as a band. During the so-called Get Back sessions of 1968 and 1969, later forming the basis of the Let It Be album, Paul McCartney pushed for a return to the stage, hoping the group could recapture its early spirit. But tensions within the band were growing, and by 1970, the dream had crumbled. The Beatles had split, and each member began walking their own path. Paul McCartney, always eager to reconnect with the magic of performing live, released 2 solo albums, McCartney and Ram. But what he truly craved wasn't just solo fame. It was the feeling of being in a band again, a new era. And so, in 1971, Paul formed Wings. The lineup was intimate and unexpected. His wife, Linda McCartney, joined on keyboards. Guitarist Denny Laine and drummer Denny Seiwell completed the group. They debuted with the album Wildlife, and by early 1972, Paul was back where he belonged, on the road. But it wasn't an arena tour. There were no red carpets, no press vans, no Beatles songs even. Paul deliberately avoided performing any of the Fab Four's classics, not because he didn't love them, but because he didn't want the weight of comparison. He needed a fresh start. He needed to earn the stage again. So he did something bold and beautifully unpretentious. With no itinerary and little fanfare, Wings packed into a van and hit the motorway for an impromptu university tour across the UK. It drove north with little more than instruments and a dream, choosing cities at random. Paul later recalled, "We literally took off up the M1, got to Ashby de la Zouch, liked the name, turned off, but there was no gig. It was just a signpost. Eventually we got to Nottingham University, and that was it. We said, let's just do universities." Those first shows were raw, unpolished, and sometimes shaky, but they were real. And for Paul, after 6 years away from live music, they were exhilarating. Still, stepping back into the spotlight came with pressure. In a candid 1974 interview with Rolling Stone, Paul admitted just how much fear he carried with him onto the stage. "The main thing I didn't want to face was 5 rows of press people with little pads saying, 'Oh well, he's not as good as he was.' It was a brutal internal battle, the expectation to live up to the legend he had helped create. With no Beatles material allowed, Wings had to fill a full set list from scratch. Paul confessed, "We didn't have enough songs. I didn't have something like My Love yet, something that felt truly mine. And I knew the audience wanted Beatles songs. So yeah, I was nervous." Yet he pushed through. From humble university halls to sold-out theaters across Europe, Paul McCartney reclaimed the stage on his own terms. And in doing so, he proved something powerful. The spirit of live music isn't found in fame or legacy. it's found in the courage to start over. For Paul, the Wings era wasn't just a musical rebirth, it was a personal reckoning. Gone were the finely pressed suits, the uniform stage presence, and the massive machinery that propelled the Beatles forward. Now, Paul stood at the front of a brand new band with all eyes on him, not as one-fourth of a global phenomenon, but as a man starting over, no longer protected by the Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership, no longer riding the unstoppable wave of Beatlemania. Paul was carving a new identity in real time. The early Wings performances were imperfect. Critics were often unforgiving, some even questioning whether McCartney still had what it took. He was aware of every stare, every pen in the press row, every unspoken comparison to his past glory. But rather than shrink from the pressure, Paul embraced the uncertainty. He knew the only way to silence doubt was to keep playing and to evolve. Throughout 1972 and 1973, Wings continued to grow. With Linda McCartney at his side on keyboards, Paul not only defied critics who dismissed her lack of formal training, he proved that chemistry and authenticity could outweigh technical precision. The band's bond was more personal than professional, and that rawness gave their music an unpolished charm. As Wings toured small theaters across Europe and eventually graduated to larger venues, the once wobbly foundation became more confident. The energy on stage became sharper, the performances tighter, and the songs began to take on lives of their own. By 1973, Wings released Red Rose Speedway, featuring the melodic anthem My Love, a track Paul had longed for, a song that was finally his, not just a memory of the Beatles, but something born in his new chapter. My Love became a #1 hit in the US, and with it, Paul regained a sense of musical footing. Now, he wasn't just the man who used to be a Beatle, he was proving he could lead a band to success on his own terms. Still, despite the commercial victories, Paul never forgot the lessons of those early Wings tours. The awkward silences, the nervous energy, the sting of rejection. They had grounded him, humbled him, and they reminded him that no matter how big the name, music must always be earned. One note, one show, one audience at a time. And yet, throughout it all, Paul remained cautious when it came to the Beatles' catalog. For much of the Wings era, he kept his old songs locked away, rarely revisiting them in concert. It wasn't until later in his solo career, during the 1989-90 World Tour, that Paul began to fully embrace Beatles classics on stage again. By then, the music had passed through the gauntlet of nostalgia, grief, and rediscovery. Now it could be celebrated freely, as part of a legacy he had made peace with. Looking back, Paul McCartney's return to live performance in the early 1970s was more than just a comeback. It was a slow, sometimes painful reclamation of his identity as a performer. It was the process of stripping away the myth and rediscovering the man. And through Wings, through every small-town university gig and every vulnerable new song, Paul reminded the world, and perhaps himself, that the music was never just a moment in time. It was a lifelong conversation, and for Paul, that conversation wasn't over. It still isn't.